Hello. Hi, good morning, everyone. If you'd all like to please take your seats, then we can commence with this exciting day. Welcome, everyone, to Kino Armata. My name is Emilia van Linden. I'm Head of Communications, Marketing and Publications for Manifesta 14. It's a great honor to have you all here this morning. Also, a very warm welcome to all of our international guests who are joining online, especially also the international media corps. It's great that you are following. I just had a few practical elements for all those internationals or all those who can't speak English. Please make sure that you have a headset. Channel 2 is the English channel, channel 1 is the Albanian. I'd kindly like to ask everyone to switch off their phones or put their phones on silent so we don't get interrupted. We very much encourage everyone to ask questions, but please refrain from doing so until the end. There will be a Q&A session. We also invite all of our international guests following online to send questions via the chat online, and then we will also try and answer as many questions as possible. Well, without further ado, it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome and invite our Managing Director, Hedwig Feijer, to speak. Thank you.
Infrastructure, dear Carlo Ratti, and dear members of our community online, welcome on this exciting morning. Clean and green environment is a human right. The UN main humanitarian rights body has voted that the right to a safe, green and sustainable environment has been declared a human right. And as a consequence, experts have been appointed to monitor human rights in connections with our climate emergency. Passing clean and green environmental solutions links us directly to the green urban vision of Carlo Ratti Associates, which he is presenting today for the future of the city of Prishtina. We hope that this urban vision gives directions and presents opportunities to not only improve the local urban environment whilst addressing the global climate crisis, but also gives global recognition of this right, which will help empower local communities also in Pristina to defend their livelihoods, their health and their cultures against environmental destruction. I think Carlo Ratti's plan fits perfectly within this projected framework. We are therefore delighted that after half a year's studies, the team of Carlo Ratti, together with Kosovo Art Architecture Foundation, APSS from Montenegro, and the university and the students of the University of Pristina, collectively can present this unique urban vision within the framework of Manifesta 14 Pristina. Traditionally, as many of you know, a contemporary art biennial. So the extraordinary context of this urban vision is based on site-specific data. We will hear later about that was collected for this purpose in Pristina and is currently being analyzed by Massachusetts Institute of Technology and their Sensible City Lab. You might ask yourself, why a so-called art biennial every 2 years commissions an urban vision? Well, the knowledge gained serves as a foundation for all our knowledge production and research and for the rest of all the Manifesta programs. This ranges, for example, from subculture mapping in Pristina, Tirana and Skopje, as well as to the citizen consultations, which over 100 citizens to investigate and question the social fabric of their city and the culture of their city, done in close collaboration with LA Studio. Additionally, these projects prelude an outcome that will lay the foundation of a permanent, sustainable experimental framework, developing a creative hub in the Hifzi Suleimani Library, as well as an eco-urban learning station in the brick factory. Commissioned this especially to revitalize the brick factory. This urban vision does not merely restrict itself to data and rhetoric. We hope it creates action. As many have said, the time of empty words is over. Now we need to take action. This is why we're happy to announce that as a direct consequence of Carlo Ratti's participatory urbanistic approach and the creation of the two symbolic interventions that took place in July earlier this year, the Ministry of Culture of Kosovo has embraced our model, specifically in regard to local mobility. The Ministry of Culture, as today, has opened up their own parking space with the aim of transforming it into a new public space for the citizens of Prishtina at the Koriku Street. Of course, it's a work in progress. With the current 2 weeks rain, we were not able to paint it, but this will come on in the next few weeks. The emphasis on Manifesta's participatory model does not only come to life between architects, artists, citizens, but foremost through a meaningful and urgent collaborations between an imperative group of public stakeholders. And starting with the municipality of Pristina, the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sport, the Ministry of Planning, without their crucial support, these projects would never come to life. Secondly, there is the dedicated support of the United Nations Development. Many thanks to you and the United Nations Habitat Group, specifically also the generous fund of the Matra Fund, a Dutch fund, and thank you, Mrs. Karin Loboso, the Dutch ambassador to Kosovo, who is present here today. Additional, Manifesta has also worked for the past years to acquire specific funds for Manifesta 14 here in Pristina for a variety from international funders and organizations. And we have to say special thank you to the Amsterdam philanthropic organization Hartwig Foundation of Rob de Vares, with whom our core projects could not be implemented. And additionally, we're also immensely grateful for the European Union Creative Europe Western Balkan Fund, through which we also welcome 8 of our 10 partners present here today from across the region of the Western Balkan. Our hope is vested in the possibility that this urban vision of Carlo Ratti is used as a guide to how the city of Pristina can be transformed in the next decade into a safe, green, clean and sustainable environment. And before I invite Spent Ahmeti, the mayor of Pristina, to the floor, I invite also Mr. Rineta Yashari, head of the cabinet and political advisor to the Minister of Environment, Spatial Planning and Infrastructure, one of our decisive partners in this transformation. But of course, before they speak, I would like to express my utmost gratitude to the team of Carlo Ratti Associates. To Carlo Ratti himself, many thanks that you flew in, many thanks that you wanted to work with us. Daniele Belleri, CRA's leading partner, and Ezra Dinarama, CRA's local researcher and architect, for this precious gift from all of us collectively to the city of Pristina. Mr. Spent Ahmeti, I would like to invite you to the lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hedvig. I was deciding whether to speak in Albanian or English, but as I saw Hedvig speaking in English and no one with headphones, I assumed that it's better to speak in English because majority of our audience is English speaking. Thank you very much, Hedvig, dear Ms. Yashari, Carlo, everyone present. It's my pleasure today to be here because I think we started this journey with Hedvig, it seems almost, I don't know, a history ago, if I can put it that way. We were very happy when we started this bid, ICUL, I think, with Il Rugova when we were, you know, almost hopelessly bidding for Manifesta to be the host. And we were in these final 3 cities together with Vienna and Kiev. And we were thinking, what could we say about Pristina that would make Manifesta come to our city instead of Kiev and Vienna? And we started talking and developing this story that this is, in a way, a unique place in its own. Only in our city you can find, as you pass from the Ottoman architecture to Yugoslav architecture or communist architecture, and then end up what we call with the neoliberal architecture, which is do anything you want, anywhere you can. You know, we call that the post-war period. And obviously, you can monitor, watch this architecture, but at the end of the day, you know, we like to live because even this chaos in Pristina has its order as well. We are a very hospitable city. We are at the crossroads of the Balkans. No other capital is in a distance of an average 2.5 hours from all other capitals in Western Balkans. So whether you're going to Skopje, Tirana, Podgorica, Belgrade, you're assuming that more or less it's 2.5 hours away. But we don't like to think of our city just as the city that you pass from going from one country to another. But we like to see and think of our city as a city where people stop once and then they like to come back. You know, in a way we consider it our home. And for many other people in Kosovo who come to live in Pristina, it's the second home. So it is a home to almost 500,000 people during the day, I say, as a capital, but about 370,000 people during the night that sleep here and live here. And we are currently at the crossroads. That was the second point why it was very important for us, because as we move from this neoliberal period of building whatever you want and a lot of illegal practices, now we move to the phase of planning and actually merging a lot of the plans that Pristina did in the past years. We just passed a Green City Action Plan, which is an 8 to 10 years plan about how to promote a green Pristina. That includes especially the fight against air pollution. We are working in 2 directions. We're going to have the second biggest plant of solar panel district heating in Europe after Denmark, since we signed, and we are working with the German government on a 75 million euro project to actually include heating for all district housing. We are working on buying new buses, both for the public sector, and we are just issuing a tender for private sector for 160 buses. We're talking about planting trees, we're talking about parks, we are talking about a greener Pristina. That's one thing. Second, we finished the first in the Balkans as a capital, the urban mobility plan, which we did with EBRD, which is a 12-year plan that includes 200 projects and measures that are needed to improve both the transport in the sense of mobility of people, public transportation, but also include the percentage of people that use bikes and actually pedestrian areas to move around the city. And obviously we are also working on the development plan of Pristina, which is now currently at the stage which we call our constitution, that doesn't set the details of the plan of Pristina, but actually talks about a direction that we are trying to move in. And at all of this comes Manifesta. And actually, at the beginning, we were thinking about hosting Manifesta as a revenue source for our economy, because we were talking about, if I'm not mistaken, 200,000 visitors that would come during this period of 2022, where many artists and urban planners and architects would come. But then as we were talking more and more about the application, we were thinking about not just seeing this as a source of revenue, but actually using this expertise that comes maybe once in 10 or 20 years of urban planners and using them as much as we can to help us through this process. And as I say, we are in a crossroads of merging all of these strategies and documents, but also we are at a crossroad of our citizens thinking, where do we go next? And this is where Carlo Ratti comes in. Because I remember at the beginning when we were talking to Carlo, we had a modest budget. We were trying to convince a good architect to come. And as we were talking, obviously the sum of money was not the issue. I asked for a video conference with Carlo, asking him, you know, we don't have the money to pay such a great team. You know, we have this budget, but are you really interested in doing this work with us. And it was crucial, I think, that we were doing a Zoom video conference with Massachusetts in Boston, and we were talking. Basically, Carlos said yes, and I think until now he has proven that his team, himself, were really serious about taking this work and helping us in this place. I was trying with Hedvig, always when they were asking from municipality for something, I was saying, we're not going to tell you, we're not going to tell you. We need you to be independent, because at the end of the day, this work is not going to go through as we planned unless there is some space for criticism for municipal government. If we help you in each step of the way, not just with a budget, then it will be a weird situation. I think in history we have both Palermo and Marseille to think about. In Palermo, very much in line with what Manifesta was doing. In Marseille, a lot of debate with the mayor, and I think it has to stay that way, that we need to keep this debate going, because obviously we're not going to agree on all of the issues. And we basically set what I call the main topic, which is to choose a project, a single project that brings together all of these questions. And it was the brick factory, Tultoria, as we call it. It was the first time, I think, in history of any capital, especially in the Balkans, that we don't privatize the thing, but actually the municipality buys it. So we bought this space for about 5 million euros, 20% of its actual value, because that's what the law allows us to do. So we bought with 5 million euros a very interesting space, which is an old brick factory. It's almost, I would say, empty. It's dangerous in terms of, because it has asbestos also in its roofs, and there is a lot of illegal construction by some of the workers that used to work in the brick factory. At the end of the day, we just see the chimneys and we say, what the hell is this space? We wanted to ask basically several questions. The first one, can we use art and education in regeneration of urban spaces? How can we use these projects, whether it's a hub, and I see now a lot of the candidates in the next elections for Pristina are talking about making that an educational hub, a cultural hub, whatever it is. We're not talking about private housing. We are talking about a public space that is going to be used by the public. So that was question number one. Second, it is one of the poorest neighborhoods in Pristina, one of the poorest areas. Can we, through art and education projects, an investment by the municipality and its partners, bridge the gap between some of the, what I would call, richer areas of Pristina with that area? So what's the impact that that project would have? And third, it was whether we can protect cultural heritage. Obviously, it's an ongoing fight. I praise the current Minister of Culture because he made it one of its priorities. And that is industrial cultural heritage, because no one wants to bring down the two chimneys. It is an identity of Pristina. We've seen it in almost every postcard, 20 and 30 years ago. And how do we preserve, protect the industrial cultural heritage that we have in the city? We thought that these three questions could actually be used as a standard for all other areas in the city. On how do we fight for public spaces? On how do we protect the story of Pristina? On how do we use projects to actually economically develop areas? And how do we decrease inequality between the different neighborhoods that we have in the city? Therefore, I would say that whoever becomes mayor has three major fights. Obviously, one is almost one, which is to protect the Tultore. As I say, neoliberal period, I say that we changed the concept and direction completely for, before the war, from a communist period of protecting public spaces to a complete opposite of actually thinking only about private spaces, our apartments and our gardens. So how do we protect Tultoria? How do we protect Palau Tirini's up at the youth center, which also we took under our own ownership a couple of years ago. We took it with debts about 4 million euros, but it's worth it. Yes, there is a lot of work to be done, but it is the identity, I would say, of Pristina. If the two chimneys appeared in postcards, I think the youth center appeared in almost every book, every place that Pristina is mentioned, almost the same as the library. And the third, which I would say I as mayor and we as administration had most pressure, is the bus station. It's a huge area in the entrance of the city where all the highways meet and everybody wants to build a shopping mall there. You know, at this stage when we are talking only about shopping malls and individual housing, we thought that it's almost the most important thing in the agenda to protect that space as well. Therefore, in order to protect it, we actually did an international competition of building a new bus station, which is integrated with a sports hall, which would be the second biggest. And we did the international competition. I'm happy to say that we selected a company from Slovenia with a very, very, very good solution that integrates the bus station with a new sports hall, but more importantly for us, it protects that public space. Therefore, if there is one message that we'd like to send, and it's not just the problem of Pristina, because we are in this, we go to these, we have almost like a union of mayors of capitals of Western Balkans, and regardless of where you're talking about, whether it's Skopje that has a lot of space, whether it's Belgrade that is now becoming one of the major capitals, whether it's Podgorica, which is smaller than us, or Tirana just became 1 million inhabitant city, we all have the same problems. How to protect public spaces. We are not going against the private interests, you know, for the sake of going against the private interests, but we're trying to find a nice equilibrium between private interests and actually protecting the public interest of the citizens. Therefore, if there is one message, because I know that I will leave Manifesta in safe hands to the next mayors, I think we have a wonderful group of mayors who have all expressed their commitment to Manifesta and what it is trying to do. I would say there is one simple message. Let's protect what is left of our public space. Let's regenerate that and see how it makes the life of citizens better. Thank you, Hedvig, for all this cooperation that we've had. Thank you, Carlo, one more time for doing this with us. Thank you to your team. I think we're going to have a wonderful presentation. And I would call on all urban planners, experts to be included as much as possible this year, next year, and what we will have after next year in trying to promote this public debate and discussion about our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Dear Mrs. Fian, dear ambassadors and heads of organizations, dear Mr. Ahmeti, dear Mr. Ratti, dear colleagues and other participants in this discussion. I feel very delighted and honored to be here today among colleagues to discuss the important topic of Manifesta's 14th, which aims to support the citizens of Pristina in their ambition to reclaim public space and to rewrite the future of their capital as an open-minded metropolis in the Balkan and Europe through the development of a new cultural institution for Kosovo. Manifesta's contribution to immerse within the city of Pristina and to build something together with the citizens is a departure point for the new vision. And I believe this is the great resumption for the interventions that are being made by Manifesta's team. Through the development of various strategies which come as in the end result of appropriate interventions in urban areas, we will be able to achieve a proper urban vision for the sustainable city. As the capital of Kosovo, Pristina has the largest number of inhabitants and the center of all its governing institutions and the wide range of international institutions. However, now Pristina does not offer many opportunities for public spaces where the community or three generations can spend their time in the public spaces. If we are based on urban planning, we are aware that urban areas have the greatest environment impact. Therefore, for urban vision of Pristina will have to be based on this aspect. We live here, and as the citizens of Pristina, every day we faced with the problems such as traffic jam, massive construction, lack of public spaces, greenery, and many others. Therefore, through the mobility plan, the possibility of using public transport, the creation of polycentric city, highlighting the identity of heritage it has, Pristina, increasing the comfort for citizens through the common spaces, and every important corporation with the new generation, which has a very clear vision for the city, we would have a stable and full of life city. So everything we talk about, in principle, must be related to the special planning of Kosovo, which must be through of in many dimensions. In the end, I do believe that Manifesta 14's contribution will be a great value, will contribute to the overall goal of how the city of Pristina can be transformed for regarding public spaces for its citizens, and as such will serve the great motivator for the further development of different projects that will promote and process the regeneration and creation of new public spaces in Kosovo. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for all what has already been said. So my name is Carlo Ratti. I want to share with you some of the work we've been doing over the past 6 months and more on Pristina, on the urban study on Pristina. Can we see the slides? Yes. I think we've got a few technical things. Meanwhile, well, let's wait for a second, and then if not, I can start anyway. Yes, I see it here. I see the slides here, but you don't see them on the other screen. I think they will fix it soon. But maybe just a couple of things to tell you about where we ended up. You know, some of this was mentioned by Hedvig. Yes, you know, this is about finding a new way to look at the environment in Pristina. And also, as it was mentioned, is a way to engage people. Something that, you know, we've been working a lot on the concept of open source architecture. In this case, we'll present to you something that we think could be very, very interesting. Pristina could become a model for other cities that's related to open source at the urban scale, open source urbanism. But that's great. We see it here. So anyway, common sense. Let's go to the next slide. Reclaiming public space in Pristina, as I was just telling you. Oh, sorry. Would you like me to do it? To go to the next? Okay. This is dangerous. Let's try. No? Okay. Maybe like this. One sec. No, it's not working from beginning.
When you press it, they will press it, and we pretend that it's working.
Come on, it should work. No, but it's working from there, I think. Okay. Okay, now it's working. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, first of all, just to tell you, for those of you who are not very familiar with our work, I just want to tell you how we operate. So the work was done primarily with CRA, Carlo Ratti Associati. We're based in New York, in Turin, Italy, in London. But also with a good part about research. It was done at the Sensible City Lab. It's a lab at MIT where I teach. So MIT, Sensible City Lab, we're based in Boston. We're in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Also MIT has a research operation in Cambridge, in Singapore. We're part of that. And then there's a growing ecosystem of startups and other, other companies that came out of them. So but basically, the research you'll see is from CRA with a good part that I will show you later, more related to the analysis of the city that was done in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at MIT. This is still not working very well. Okay, well, this was just to share with you some of the things we're involved with at CRA today. You know, they go from the first project you see is in Brasilia, is the extension of the Brasilia master plan. The second one you see to the right is a project in Helsinki. They just won the Helsinki Energy Channel to help decarbonize the city. What you see there to the right is actually a skyscraper. That's a real picture, almost completed in Singapore, one of the tallest one in Singapore. And some other projects. What you see at the lower part is actually the Italian pavilion in Dubai. We also have a small base in Dubai now related to design. Let me know when I can go. Yes? So we are still having a little bit of technical issues. Maybe it's better if I say next slide and you press the arrow because this is, is not really working. Next slide. almost. I can tell you more, in some of the other projects. By the way, you also see something, we're doing some work on Rockefeller Center, you see there. And also, we think it's very important when we deal with design. Okay? When we deal with design, it's also very important to have a conversation. It's very important to use design to try something. You'll hear more about this also by Mr. Iaforte, Daniele, who will speak later. But basically, design is a way to start a conversation, to get feedback from citizens. And so also, we try to be engaged in this discussion in different ways. You might have seen an op-ed that was here in the newspaper in Pristina yesterday about, what we are doing, what we're trying to do with the research. This is something else that we've been writing recently with Rachel Florida and others. But this was just to tell you a little bit about, ourselves. And then, yeah, sorry guys, please, when I say next, you press the button. Can you go to the previous one? Because this doesn't work. So the question we started with is an important question. It's a crucial question, we heard it before as well, is about how to reclaim public space in Pristina, especially in the past few decades, especially since the war. Actually, like in many cities, public space wasn't a priority. And so how can we actually now focus on this? It's not different than what many other world cities have done in the past. Think about Barcelona did a project on this when during the 1990s, for the 1990 Olympics and after the Olympics, in order really to focus urban action on reclaiming public space. Next slide. And as I was telling you, we've been working for a few years with this idea of open source architecture. This actually started with an op-ed I wrote for Domus that was here a few years ago, looking at how we can really use open source approach, an approach based on sharing, on engaging citizens in design. Next slide. And, by the way, this is a page on Wikipedia. You can look it up. Actually, that page was started by that op-ed in Domus, and now there have been, probably thousands of hands from all over the world that contributed to the concept. So this idea, again, you try something, then you let it grow, you let engage people in order to, for the idea to develop. Next slide. By the way, if any of you is interested, there's also a book we published not too long ago about open source architecture. The book itself actually done with many voices and many hands. Next slide. Now, so how could that translate into how we transform a city? And so that's where we actually have been developing, I think, a very interesting methodology here in Pristina. In the methodology, you use mapping in order to understand some of the key issues. That's what you will see in a moment. Then, what we call paint the city. Where paint is kind of the extreme, but think about temporary intervention to transform the city. And then basically people can vote with their feet, can go to those places, can say, I like it, I don't like it. Based on this temporary intervention can be a way to activate the city. That's what we are hoping that will happen next year with Manifesta itself, but it already happened last summer with some small intervention Hedvig mentioned. And then through that, you create feedback loops. So you reflect, you evolve, and you go back to square one, and you continue with this. If you want, it's a bit similar to what nature does. Nature is based on mutations, and then some mutations will work out, some will not work out. In those mutations, the one that actually work will actually become more and more permanent in the long trail of evolution. In a similar way for the city, in this open source way, we believe that by actually understanding the city, proposing temporary changes and getting feedback from people, we can create these kind of feedback loops that can transform urban innovation. And again, this has never been formalized in this way. We think, what we are doing here, what we started doing 6 months ago, what we are doing here all the way with until Manifesta next summer, can really be something that could be then taken, used and applied by other cities as a way, again, to speed up urban transformation. Next slide. So I just want to tell you, as I said, we've been here now for a while. We enjoyed very much all the time we spent in the city. This was actually the first site visit in spring 2021. Next slide. And then over the summer, actually, we came, and also that's when we did with many of you some of the interventions. You'll see them in a moment, at the beginning. And this kind of new methodology that for participatory urbanism, what we call open source urbanism, is really combining bottom-up and top-down, digital and physical. We can start with something quite inexpensive and then test it. Think about a small bridge. You do it, you test it, and if that works, then you turn it into something much more expensive. But you can do a bridge with scaffolding with not much money. I'll get back to that soon. Encouraging feedback loops. Really, it's a conversation. It's a conversation. Citizens should decide what type of city they want. So that has to be a two-way conversation, and design can be the catalyst for the conversation. And then, foot voting, people voting with their feet. So somehow, people can both express their opinion in an explicit way. The mayor had agreed initially to open up his WhatsApp so that everybody could send him messages about, what they like, what they don't like. Then we realized during the election period maybe that was not ideal. But apart from that, people can both express really with words what they think about some intervention, but also by going there, by using that bridge, the new public space, voting with their feet. And then doing this with really accelerated feedback loops to turn temporary into permanent. Next slide. By the way, as we are talking about open source urbanism, clearly all of this was really done in a collaborative way. And so here you see some of the partners who've helped so far, but partners are really all of you. Partners are really all the citizens of Pristina. Next slide. And here you see also, again, to begin, we started really having many conversations. Some of the people you see here who talked to us via Zoom, we got a lot of feedback, through them and many others, just as a first way to start this two-way communication. And this two-way communication allowed us, as you see in the next slide, to actually start focusing on some of the keywords, and then from this, to then focus our attention on public space, as it was mentioned a moment ago. Next slide. So now I'll leave it to Dan Belleri Giaforte, who will tell you a bit more about all the mapping we have been doing, and then I'll come back to tell you about the next steps. But Dan, why don't you take over here with ERS?
Thank you very much, Carlo, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So I will spend the next few minutes telling us a little bit about the activity of mapping that we implemented in the last 6 months with our team. We work closely with the institution of Pristina, so we got official data. We also created our own data when data was missing, and we hope that this presentation will allow people of Pristina to see their city in a different way, in a different light, and will allow our international guests to discover the incredible potential of this place. Next slide, please. So we start with the first section. We call it the Battle for Public Space in Pristina, which is the definition that we came up with that somehow encapsulates the challenge we're dealing with. So the challenge of getting back to public space after the last decades, in which the direction was very different. Next slide, please. So yeah, we can start with a few maps, and next slide, please. We can start by locating and situating Pristina, and Pristina occupies a substantial size of the country of Kosovo. What is interesting is not that the city, the municipal territory, is not just an urban core. There is also a great number of municipalities and villages, so that is part of the ecosystem we need to take into account. Next slide, please. But the urban core in itself is also quite small, and this is very interesting. In this map, you can see in different colors the part of the city you can reach in 15 minutes, 1-5, either by foot or by bike, and so essentially you can get everywhere. And so a city of this size has also great potential for urban innovation, because you can, even small changes can extend very quickly to the entire urban territory. Next slide, please. We also need to want to focus on the flows of people that use the city, as the mayor mentioned. And here we can see the diaspora visualized in a very simple way, like the flights connecting Pristina with the rest of Europe. So these people often come back to the city, and they also drive some of its urban real estate development. Next, please. But we also know that Pristina is a very young city with 50% of the population under the age of 25. And here we mapped the origin of the students of the University of Pristina and where they come from. So we see that this presence of youth is further reinforced as they come to study in the capital city of Kosovo. Next, please. Now we look at the history, and the mayor mentioned, next please, we can say that the story of Pristina is a tale of 3 cities. You can see in green the Ottoman developments and the imprint of it. In purple, the extension in the Yugoslav period. And the outer part of it, the one you see in gray, is a development of the last 20 years. So the city expanded dramatically, and somehow we are faced with the challenges of these 3 different types of urban development. and how we can integrate them better, how we can also observe their impact on public space. Next, please. We're just going to show very quickly how they look like, even though people in Pristina know them very well. So you saw before the small alley of the Ottoman city, then the neighborhood built in the Yugoslav period. This is perhaps an image that encapsulates the development the last 20 years, high density, not much public space, cars really sort of overwhelming the public land. Next, please. And of course, each of these changes had its important consequences, sometimes even with dramatic dimension, as we saw, for instance, in the parallel system in the 1990s in Pristina. We see here the official location of the University of Pristina in blue, and in purple, the parallel system, so where ethnic Albanians were gathering during this period of strong segregation. Next, please. If we talk about the city, we also need to take into account planning and urban planning. And there's a history which is quite interesting. You see the different shades of purple, different planning throughout the years. And now perhaps the challenge for the institutions here is how to continue this path, now that the expansion has somehow went beyond any possible planning. So how to catch up. That's like one of the big challenges of like public space in Pristina and its future. Next, please. But if we talked also earlier, and Edvig mentioned, the environmental degradation. This story is very much related to the urban expansion of the last 20 years. Now we see those maps, 2006, next please, 2018, so in 12 years we see the substantial growth of the city, and the consequence of it has been that the soil quality has been impoverished substantially. So in many parts of the city, the soil cannot breathe as it was before. So it's definitely something that should be addressed in the future of Pristina. Next, please. Here we see a neighborhood in which the street somehow cuts between, on the right, you see the Yugoslav development, and on the left, the neoliberal architecture with its lack of public spaces. Next, please. And it's also interesting to notice that despite the history of the last 20 years, substantial parts of Pristina are still public. And the issue of ownership of land should be always considered whenever doing something. Often ownership is problematic and contradictory, and it's hard to find the actual owner. But anyway, there are still substantial swaths of the city owned by public authorities. This also gives a possible good input for future developments. Next, please. And we started then to map what is there and what is not there. And so next, we can see that public space in Pristina tend to be concentrated by official definitions in the center of the city. You see here all kinds of public spaces, parks, green areas, squares, and other activities. We see that they are more in the central part of the city, but there's not just an issue of quantity, there is also an issue of quality. And so our research has tried to analyze both quantity and the special patterns of segregation, but also quality and how to improve public space in Pristina. And we can go next slide, please. This also is a very nice visualization of how much public space you can access from your house by walking 5, 10, or 15 minutes, so by foot. And so there are parts of the city where you need to walk maybe more than 15 or 20 minutes to get to any public space, especially in the north and south parts of Pristina. Other visualizations, we can go next. Next, please. The parks in Pristina are generally well perceived by the population. There is an issue of safety that different studies documented, especially during nighttime for women. So this is something that should be taken into account for future study of the city. Next, please. Next, please. So we see just some images. We work with a very a good photographer called Malinda Oja that helped us to tell the story of the city in parallel to our maps. Also, it's interesting to focus on green areas. Green areas are not parks, and they look, as you see in the next slide, often something like that. So almost like indeterminate spaces in between buildings, especially as we see in the next slides in the Yugoslav developments. And so these spaces should be reinvented. And my colleague Artin Rama will talk a little bit later on how we can reinvent and reimagine those spaces to foster a creation of new public space in Pristina. And next, please, we see different green spaces in Pristina not very used. I also wanted to mention the idea of squares. So officially, if we look at the map, there are not many squares in Pristina. We see in next page, we see the Boulevard Maria Teresa, and at the end and the beginning of it, there are squares, but we can perhaps think of more squares, next slide, if we think about the many urban voids, the many spaces that are now not used. So yes, there are maybe only just a few squares, but in the future, we can imagine to have many more and people can gather there. Next, please. I will just go very quickly to this section. So we mapped also playgrounds, next, and next again, and like also the sports fields next, which are more evenly distributed. So it's a good start for people to gather also in some outer areas. This is a nice experiment we did with the students of the University of Prishtina that made a great contribution to the project. And I would like to thank Professor Ilir Ginoli for his great support. So we started to explore these different neighbors of Pristina, Ottoman, Yugoslav, and post-war, and try to understand how easy it was to walk without interruptions. And next slide, please. And the students went around and they started to map what we call the erosion of sidewalks, which means, next slide, you're walking down your way, but then there's a car, so you need to move, or maybe, next slide, there's something like gets in the way, maybe from private houses. So this is like the battle for public space that is happening on the sidewalks of Pristina, and we believe that we should work to steer that in the direction of the commons, as the title of our presentation. I will finish my part just with this focus on social integration, and the idea of fragmentation is quite recurring in the interviews we held with experts, activists, public servants, and urbanists in Pristina. We're trying to visualize it in maps. Next, please. So we made this interesting survey, and you can just go quickly through this series of images. We asked people, where is the border of the center of Pristina? And there were different answers. And so you see that there's somehow an interesting issue of, let's say, there's a lack of recognition, but at the same time, there's also the potential of imagination here. So we can imagine to enlarge and expand the definition of the city center of Pristina to include neighborhoods that are perhaps outside of it, but that could be part of it and be included in this vision. So there's more than 10 or 12 of those different borders, and you see there's a nice final map with all the possible borders of the center of Pristina that sometimes extend even very much far away from the official definition. Next slide. This actually reflects an uncertainty also in the official definitions, because the historical center borders had shifted in the last 30 years. The darker area of the Ottoman neighborhood, but then other definitions in other plans somehow try to enlarge the city center. So we see here the possibility of once again expanding and changing the perception of what is the center of Pristina and how it can be reconnected with the neighbors around it. Next slide. We also look at demography, and we can go next. The different presence of ethnic minorities in the city. Next again. This is interesting, social aid recipients. We see something that is not evident by walking in the streets, perhaps. So in the north of the city, there's more recipients of social aid. Let's continue. And if we could read that in parallel with air pollution, also the northern part of the cities where air pollution is more present. We go again, we work with the Millennium Foundation to get some of this data. Once again, we can continue. And on the opposite, in the south of the city, we see in the last few years the emerging of gated communities. Gated communities are neighborhoods which are accessible during the day by everybody, but in the night they close their gates to people who live there. So they are probably the opposite model of, let's say, the public space in the sense that we would like to propose and like to create together with the community. So there's not only this shift between center and periphery, but also north and south Pristina present this pattern. I've almost finished, let's continue. We also mapped mobility dynamics, comparing the patterns of taxis with public transportation, which is overlaid in the red lines. And so we see that, once again, the neighbors built in the last 20 years often lack public transportation, with the result of putting further pressure on the system and on the street and mobility of Pristina. And so our solution, our proposed solution that we'll present later, will focus very much on putting these elements together: sustainable mobility, integration between nature and the city, and integration also with other neighborhoods. Let's continue. We can go next. I will just put also next a few images in the end, just to give you once again an idea of the city and its potential, and often its contradictory public space. And we're gonna see now the next idea that we gather working with MIT, and Carlo will come back in a moment, to analyze the battle for public space with new technological tools. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. So as you see, this was the first part, really looking at data, looking at the city through many, many angles, looking at different layers to identify some of the issues. And, and the issue, and the key issue that emerges through all of this is really public space. And, this kind of battle for public space, and how we could probably reinforce public space to heal many dimensions of the city. Now, when we were doing this, we also said, how can we go one level further in analyzing public space? How can we really study a bit more in detail? What you see in here is data, it's fine-grained data, but it doesn't tell us, for instance, in real time how people are using public space. And well, this is possible today, something that has not been done yet, almost in any city in this level, and we decided to try it here for the first time in Pristina. So using artificial intelligence in order to understand really in real time how public space is being used and how we can fix it and improve it. Next slide. So I want to start to tell you this about work that's very well known in urban studies and planning that was done by William White in New York in the second half of the 20th century. And what William White did was actually use a lot of footage from cameras in order to see how people use public space. What you see here is different type of public spaces in New York. William White pioneered this. Next slide. Give some other examples. And what the interesting thing here that he saw is that you can not only get a general sense of how public space is used, but you really look at how each individual is using it. Look at this, go to a much higher granularity, really better understand what happens there, what type of connections. And people here, you see these are different parts, and so he started doing. Now, next slide. The problem, and you see here how he was doing, just by taking a camera, then taking all the footage, and actually what he was doing was manually annotating. You'll see it in a moment how this image would then be translated into analytics. So that is still very well known in urban studies and planning, was very influential at the time. Well, what is the drawback? The drawback is that it takes you a lot of time to take all the footage and to manually annotate it. So we said, today there's a great opportunity. We started exploring it in other cities, but as I said, this is a way of mapping public space has never been done in any other city globally. And so we decided to test it here in Pristina. Now, let me tell you first what we are doing in other cities. Today, there's plenty of footage that we can get just online. For instance, Google Street View. This is an image from Google Street View. Next slide. And if you take Google Street View, the interesting thing is that today, you can actually use artificial intelligence, the same type of systems that you find everywhere. In airports for facial recognition, you find it for many other applications. People use it for x-rays. But if you apply to the city, you can do this kind of segmentation of the city. This is what we're doing in Paris. You can understand all the different pieces of the city. So for instance, you can classify where is public space and how it's being used. Next slide. And you see here, you can annotate. You can this can be done automatically. So what William White was doing in a very painful way, using a lot of time, his time of other researchers, to annotate the image, now you can do it dynamically like this. Next slide. And what you get, this again is Paris, what you can really get a very automated and interesting way to see exactly what is going on in the city. Now, we've been using this in Paris in order to working with RATP. Again, this in Paris is kind of the first time this is done globally. With RATP is the big transportation company in Paris, running Le Métro and all the public transportation system. But here in Pristina, we said, what if you use something similar in order to map public space? Again, something that never been done, and we think it's a very, very interesting research contribution to urban studies and planning. Next slide. However, we started with a big problem. The problem is that, when you do this, you can find a lot of, in many cities, you can find Google Street View and other systems, but there's no Google Street View in Pristina. And you see here, this is actually the global coverage of Google Street View. If you zoom in, you see, this is Google Street View. All of those blue lines, you see, Italy is fully covered. In Italy, almost every street you can find Google Street View, not only cities, but basically all the streets. But you see, there's really a lot of holes in all the region, and in particular here in Kosovo and Pristina. You see, Kosovo is really there, and there's no coverage. So we said, okay, no problem, we'll build our own Google Street View. So next slide. So we work with the local universities, Google Street View, they go around with cars and cameras on the cars in order to collect it. And well, we did the same thing with students and camera on students' head. They had a lot of fun, I believe. We use this kind of new hardware that is quite new and quite innovative, does 360-degree scanning. Next slide. Well, you see, this was what was done. It took quite a bit of time with all the students at the university. Next slide. So next slide, here you see the way of collecting footage also from cars and for bicycles. Next slide. Next, you see here, and this is what you see, for instance. This is the footage you're getting, which is exactly what Google gets. So the first thing we did was collect all of this footage. And incidentally, we think this can also be a very nice legacy. We hope that, with the help of Manifesta, we can put this, make it public. So yes, Pristina might not be covered by Google Street View, but can be covered by almost like a more democratic bottom-up Google Street View, not Google Street View, Street View, that could be used by others in order to describe the city. Now, when you got this, then you need to apply artificial intelligence to understand public space and mapping. Again, this has never been done. It's the first city in the world where this methodology was tested. And you see it here, this is still work in progress, so you see just some things, but you see you can start identifying all the cars. That's the same footage we saw before, and you start, segment the city. So you can see where is the space for, you can start asking the question, where are cars, where are people? Where are the boundaries, where are the places, there are public spaces where people don't use them. So next slide. So anyway, you see now a few slides about, the type of things you can do, which is really automatically, or using huge amount of footage. We are talking about, if you look at this, you're talking about billions of frames. A huge amount of footage that you actually segment in order to understand how the city works. Next, you see you can look at all the different things, public space, cars, buildings, how people use it, and so on. So this is still work in progress. I wanted to share it with you. Next slide. Next slide. Just to give you a sense of this. Next slide. Just we can go a bit. But basically, that is the whole area that was covered with the help of the students. So it's almost like, giving us a legacy, as I say, a new tool to understand the city. And then with the continuation of what we are doing now, we believe that we'll have, in the next few months, something quite unique in the world of urban studies and planning globally, which is an artificial-based map that can really tell us in fine grain public space, where it is, how it's been used, and how we can then improve it, which is the next part. So this was what we've done so far on the MIT side, which is still in progress, but we think we're very excited about how this can be a contribution to research, to the practice of urban studies and planning, and certainly to the city here, leaving, as I said, a digital legacy that can outlast Manifesta. Next slide. So when we got this, at this point you saw the maps at the beginning, what Dan presented, then you see this focus, this deep dive on public space. And so how could this be used for the city to fight back? Using the methodology we said before, fighting back to reappropriate public space. Next slide. And so here's where we've been looking at urban interventions. Next slide. I would like to ask, actually, again, Dan and Ers to come and present this. This is what started last summer. You know, this is a brick factory that the mayor mentioned before. You know, this is certainly one of the key points. But last summer, we focused on 2 of them to start this process of reappropriation. And then you will see, I'll come back here to tell you about the map and what we would like to achieve by next summer, which is really start creating a network. Here you see some of the nodes of the network, the brick factory and other parking that we reclaim in the city center. And then I will come back here to tell you about how we see this as evolving into a network that could really be what leads to next summer's Manifesta, and again, is a physical legacy in addition to the digital legacy we mentioned before. So Ers, why don't you take over here?
First, I'd like to try if this is working. Okay, good. So after having done all the studies, and we started with mapping, also seeing which parts of the city have the potential to be testing these new urban interventions. And we looked at some of the abandoned areas that are there in the city that also are, in a way, ready to be reclaimed by the public. One of these areas is the brick factory, and Carlo already mentioned its location that is, in a way, in a little bit sensitive location in the city. And the idea was to simply go there and along with the University of Prishtina, with the students of University of Prishtina, to paint it and to sort of paint this area where we can first talk about it and see how this space can be used in the future. Both urban interventions were short-term urban interventions, but it was a great space to start discussing not only with the University of Prishtina and other citizens that were coming to see what's happening, people who are using the space there now as well, but with other, sorry, I'm trying to, okay. But yeah, a lot of fun from the students of the University of Prishtina. I really have to go fast in these. And the idea was that this becomes a space that increases the attention towards these areas in general in the city. So it was a temporary space. We organized events there. Many people from the cultural scene, from the community came there, and we discussed together with everyone what the future of these places might be, and a lot of people put a lot of ideas into it which might have to be taken into account when designing these public spaces in the future. And throughout the time that the intervention stayed there, also the students of the University of Prishtina reclaimed this space for their own activities. So they organized the cinema, architecture events, and other events that were trying to see how this space could be used. Another space that we used for the urban interventions is the space of the Hifzi Suleimani Library. It has already also recently been abandoned, and it's a very interesting space that will also maybe be used during the Manifesta 14 as well. Also here, we did a very small symbolic act of simply extending a little bit the garden that already exists at the Hifzi Suleimani Library. Also here, it was very important to talk to the community that surrounds it. In this place, in this place, it was very important to also talk to the neighboring community. The neighboring community is much closer in these areas, and they were also giving their ideas on, Dran, can you help me? Yeah, helping us as well define what the future of this place could be. They were already, so to mention, this place as well was a parking space, and it was very important to see how parking spaces, which are a lot in Pristina, could be transformed into places for the public. And in this case, especially also for the neighboring community. So here also meeting with the neighboring community, really asking them what they think and what they think the future of these places could be. So what's next? After studying and after testing these two urban interventions, our idea is that we provide to the citizens of Pristina sort of toolkit on where to reclaim in the city. We did these studies, and we thought that it's important that these studies continue to be used, public spaces continue to be reclaimed as well. And we have a list of what we call these liminal public spaces, which are public spaces that are, or not so much public spaces, that are already existing in the city or that have the potential to become public spaces as well. And these are areas in the city that could become some of the public spaces that are used in Pristina. One of them is commercial activities. It sounds ironic, but Pristina has a lot of cafe, bar, and club culture that is already existing, and it's already used as a space for socializing for youngsters and in Pristina. And if you see in this map, there's not a correlation between where public space, where official public space is, and where these socializing activities are happening. So we think that it would be a great idea to bridge a little bit this gap, not by, let's say, flooding existing public spaces with commercial activities, but how can we bring more public space to the already existing activities that are already there in the city and that are already working well. Yeah, so this is just one of the areas that has been recently used. Hedvig as well mentioned that this area is already being transformed. It's close to the Ministry of Culture, used to be a parking space, and it's close to an area that is, it's very famous area that is flooded by bars. So our idea is how can we bring a public space close to there, and how can we test a new typology that is also involving the already existing cafe culture. This is already being implemented. The street has been already pedestrianized, and the street has already been pedestrianized, and it's already being reclaimed. So a starting point could be also markets and moving and informal markets that already exist in the city. There's many of them throughout the city, how they could become the content of new public spaces. They are already there. How can we find ideas to consolidate them and to use it as the meat, in a way, of new public spaces? Another category that is already existing in a successful way, and it's also spread more democratically throughout the city, is spaces for children, and how these spaces for children could be integrated within these neighborhoods, along with schools, which are, in a recent study by CRA and the Sensible City Lab, are the most democratic places for different communities to meet, so how they could be entangled with other public spaces as well. Next, please. And then we looked at cultural activities. These are existing cultural activities in the city, and we wanted to see how, next, please. Next, thank you. So also the campuses, and which have usually a lot of space around it that currently is unused. And so we took a look at beyond the official categories of existing cultural activities in the city, what is under the radar of initiatives from the community. So also to see what is important right now for the local community. We looked at articles by Kosovo 2.0 regarding publicness. We looked at the recent research by Kosovo Architecture Foundation that maps some of these spaces that are important for the public. And we also collaborated with Foundation 17, who are looking at how to reclaim public spaces and which buildings might be important for the memory of the community as well. Another very important category, abandoned buildings. This map has been the basis of how Termokis has started, which is one of the most important bottom-up communities. And we already used this map also to see other abandoned spaces that we already use for the urban interventions. And next, please. yes, some of the pictures in these areas that are not used, but considering the lack of public spaces, they are a great start to see another very important part of the city that could be further explored is Prishtina Modern, the modernist heritage in Prishtina. We mapped these areas from books from our interviewees, Ilir Ginoli and Arbar Sadiko, and it's very important since they have a lot of public space around them. They have been built with a lot of public space around them, which has never been used and explored. And later on, Carlo as well will explain how two of these plateaus could already be used in establishing a new meeting point in the city. Another very important part of Pristina is the temporary heritage. We all know that in Pristina, many of the buildings are in the list of heritage buildings only for the period of 1 year. By reclaiming these spaces, putting new functions there, and also they could also have an echo on the surrounding community and the surrounding public space, it could also make them, let's say, stronger in their place in the city. And many of them are at a stage that they have to be reclaimed. The permanent heritage as well are fantastic locations in the city, but they are quite closed, and it would be great that they generate a better network through the existing public spaces. And some pictures from the permanent heritage. On the list of permanent heritage, it's important to mention that there are only 4 listed heritage buildings. And Daniele already discussed a little bit about the green areas in the city. It's a category that is officially mapped as public space, but it does not function as public space in Pristina. It is very interesting because there are areas that have been built during the Yugoslav times that do not have any recreational activities in them, as well as they are not ecologically functioning well. So these could be the basis. So how the background, which is usually the landscape, can become the object of new public spaces. And we're already working on one of them. If you can continue, please. So if you see this next picture here, it's a sort of a third landscape. It's a leftover green area, which we think that it could be a great starting point to talk about also the different typologies of green areas that already exist in the city that could become the object of new public spaces. And finally, together with Kosovo Architecture Foundation, we also mapped vacant lots that exist in the city, so voids, urban voids in the city, and we do think that this could be a great basis where all these different urban triggers could have a relationship, so not necessarily building something new, but using the existing network of all these liminal public spaces and simply building by relationship, by creating new relationships in the vacant lot, not necessarily building big projects. And this is the mapping done by Kosovo Architecture Foundation. They not only studying how they are simply voids, but also the quality of these urban voids as well. And we think that they are fantastic locations to start from. And you can see in the last picture that currently most of these areas are parkings. So, yes, thanks a lot.
All right, so what you saw with Erze is how we started then intervening in public space during the summer and identifying other places. So just to finish and wrap up, if you go to the next slide. So the third section is this, you saw the first section was about the overall mapping, the second one, the deep dive with artificial intelligence on public space, but the third one, how we can really start this feedback loop, small intervention, temporary intervention, getting feedback and transforming. So you saw what we've done so far and what there is a present, and so here is what we are planning to do by next summer. And we said, you've seen different nodes, as I was saying. The important thing is to make a network out of them. The nodes, you see the brick factory up there, you see where we've done the other intervention, you see also the railway, which is not used. And so we started thinking how we can combine all of them. Also, the beautiful thing is that, next slide, is that they also connect with some of the existing axes. And there's one interesting missing piece that we thought would be one of the key things to create really a network that works, that can allow people to go from one public space to the other place, which is this bridge. Is this bridge in the center of the city? That was actually part of the initial proposal in terms of design in Yugoslav times, but was never built. And then our idea is, why don't we build it as a connection? At the moment, you cannot connect very well. You need to go down, and then there's a lot of barriers in order to go from one public space to another one. We believe that through that bridge, we can actually try to see how it would work, also according to the original plan. It could be built quite easily with scaffolding, so not too much investment. Again, see if people like it, if people use it, then this could become one of the projects for the next mayor to implement and to leave forever, for longer, as a legacy, as a long-term legacy to the city. Next slide. And you see some other things. As I said, that bridge can become a little bit, like the High Line in New York, because next to the bridge you can have, you see there, you got the stairs, you got the small amphitheater, you got the places for people to meet up. It's not only a way to walk, it's a way really to create a linear public space that connects to existing public spaces that at the moment are fragmented, underused, and not connected. And here are some initial visualizations and images of how this could be. The design can be refined, again, with people's feedback. But that's one of the key things we are imagining for next summer. Again, fundraising is ongoing. Hopefully we'll be able to do it. Next slide. And the other thing is, when you looked at all those maps, they show the boundary of the center of Pristina. Well, you saw that most people actually, to the left, use the railway as one of the edges. You might have seen, there were very different interpretations of the center. To the right was changing, but the left, that was kind of the boundary for most people. And again, we thought there's an opportunity there. That's the railway line. It's not used. At the moment, it's like a boundary. It's an invisible liminal wall between one side and the other side of the city. How could that, again, become a place to reconnect different communities? How could it become, again, a place for walking? Many, many railways, as you know, all over the world have been turned in recent years into bicycle paths, into places for people to walk, in Massachusetts, in Italy, in other parts of the world. And so we thought, well, if we actually do that, we connect the former brick factory to the center of the city. So again, it creates a very interesting network that you will see in a moment that we think could become the focus of what we do in the next months until the Manifesta. And if we do this in a temporary way and see how it works, that's a basis for then deciding by the administration, by the national government, by the local government, what of this could then become permanent transformation for the city in this kind of battle to reclaim public space. So that's a little bit the network we've been working on, and that we hope, permitting all the collaboration with you and some of the fundraising that is going on, we hope to be able to have materialized by next summer. With this, next slide, I want to say, this is to be continued with all of your contributions. Next slide. Thank you.
So thank you, Carlo Ratti, Daniele, and Ezra for this super inspiring presentation. I think there's a lot for all of us to do in the next coming month. And it reminds me also to the afternoon session where Catherine Nichols, the Australian but Berlin-based creative mediator, will present the synergy of all this kind of knowledge which came up on the table and how to translate this to a kind of co-creation plan. But of course we're working this upcoming month to fundraise the two missing bridge and the green corridor, which I think is for Manifesta maybe part of what could become like a long-term implementation of a fantastic solution. Let me also open up the floor for questions. I'm 100% sure there are questions in the room. There is a microphone over there. Please say your name and then to whom you want to ask the question. And then after the question time, there is lunch presented in the hall, and then we get back at 1:30 for the afternoon session.
I actually have one question from the international press, from Renaud Mangon from France, for Carlo. You had stated that you had collected data and that some of it was missing. What kind of data was missing and why was it missing, just for the international context?
Yeah, no, in some of the missing part, so yeah, I don't know if I should keep, some of the missing part was that related, for instance, to the equivalent of Google Street View that I shared, the fact that some data that we have in other cities, such as Google Street View, is not here. But when we look at this, then we've been able, thanks to all the partners, and in particular, I really want to thank all the students from the University of Prishtina to fill some of those gaps, as you've seen before.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from inside? If not, then I would...
Yeah. There's a hand here, a couple of hands I see.
Great.
Yeah.
Could you please also state your name?
Thank you very much to all of you. It was fascinating, I must say. This is obviously very ambitious. We look forward to the realization. And I'm not here speaking as a potential donor, but really interested how to actually implement and translate that into realities, because as ambitious and as exciting as it is, how can you actually realize that with the tiny budgets of the Kosovo government, or respectively that of the municipality of Pristina? Thank you.
Say something?
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I'll leave it to you.
So the symbolic interventions we already realized. The Ministry of Culture is helping us with the third intervention to reclaim public space for the community in this Kirike Street. At the same time, we're talking with different donors. Of course, we're not going to be able, within the budget of Manifesta, to realize in next 10 months the entire green corridor. But as Carlo very much and very precisely proved, that sometimes a symbolic intervention, voting with your foot, that maybe Manifesta can do 1,300 meters of these train tracks. And we saw this in Palermo also. If you start working as kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, then people understand how it functions. And we always need to do this together with the community. So the vegetation, the looking for what sort of vegetation, how they maintain it, maybe alternative forms of materials. And we're very delighted that we are in contact with UNDP. They are very supportive in how we can find solutions. We're speaking with international donors, and I'm sure you're fully right, we cannot fix the complete green corridor within the next 10 months. This is why Manifesta is more like a catalyst, I call it, or an incubator. We start, let's say, implementations which hopefully will followed up by the public partners, and all our hopes, of course, are at the next new mayor to be elected. So in that sense, a very good and important question.
Thank you very much. I'm Donato Giuliani from the French Embassy. I would like to say that this summer we had free explorating missions in France with a lot of people, even also for your staff from Manifesta. And I think that on the French side, in the Hauts-de-France, we had a very good feedback from Le FRAC, le Studio d'Art Contemporain Le Fresnois, La Licorne, and we are very open to contribute to this very exciting project. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe just to remind, we were in Marseille, one of the Manifesta 13. It was one of the few biennials in the world where we're allowed and able to open in between the lockdowns. And as you saw, we are repeating the citizen assemblies. And I want to say that now the new administration of Marseille took the example of the citizen assembly as a permanent general assembly to the local administration. So sometimes you see with a symbolic intervention, Manifesta is able to do that. It has a kind of sustainable impact, either by the administration or by local communities.
Had we
had that question actually coming in from the French press as well. Citizens consultations happen in France, obviously in Marseille, as you said. Can you tell us a little bit about the citizens consultations here and whether or not they will what their longevity is after Manifesta has left?
Well, I think our education mediation department has started together with LA studio and Armacic, a series of citizen assemblies taking place in the Museum of Kosovo. They started 2 weeks ago and they continue as into the next 2 weeks, very much focused on specific ethnic groups, demographic, gender, etc., diversity of different citizens, to understand the, let's say, the social fabric and the relevance of how culture could function in Kosovo and what is the meaning of culture and the relevance of culture for specific groups, to further and more in depth to understand. They're going to do it next week, as I understood, in the neighborhoods of the brick factory, and then also in the neighborhoods of the Issi Suleimani.
Hedwig, I want to add something. I just having seen in the audience, representatives from diplomats from many different countries, from Italy, from France, from the Netherlands, and others, and also international organizations. I think what we are saying here is that this could really be a very interesting exercise in a city, using the city as a lab for different vectors to come together, for different people, for artists, for international and local, for artists, for citizens, all of this mixing here. And so just a thought that something quite interesting could actually be maybe to explore an innovative collaboration among many of you. And to say, wouldn't it be very nice if this, whatever the interest, and I know the Italian ambassador is in the room as well, the interest of each country could actually align. It would make this as a test, or really how also from the point of view of different type of support we can do it with a new model, with a collaborative model. Again, trying to do things together. Just a thought. Personally, I'll be very, very happy about that also because incidentally my professional life has connected me with most of the countries who, apart from Italy, I'm a citizen and a native of Italy, but also having lived or studied or researched or having operation also in France, in the Netherlands, and in the other countries represented here. So personally, I'd be very happy, but I think there could perhaps be a little bit of innovation also in coming together from different angles, which is what this Biennale is about.
And I also think yesterday, Ezra and myself, we spoke about how can we translate the content of your important studies to the citizens themselves. She was like proposing maybe we can start some information points in the center, in some of the neighborhoods, so one-to-one conversations about all these investigations and important knowledge. And I think this is something we need to, as you said, we need to try to find out a feedback from the citizens themselves, talk to people, not about them, but together with them, explore what this could mean for the communities.
Should we perhaps have one more question? I believe there was a question here. Yep.
Hi, my name is Sara Rodici, and my question goes to the Architectural Office, and it's kind of like a two-part question. The first one is like, what's the scale of the interventions that are going to happen at the brick factory? And like, what kind of activities have you planned, or have you thought about what kind of activities will happen in these urban areas? And like also, how can you make sure that they stay relevant and continue to be used after Manifesta is over? Because this kind of tends to happen in Kosovo, that spaces are kind of destroyed and left abandoned. And I feel it's very important that they keep giving a contribution to the city also after the Biennale.
I'll go first, and then maybe Hedwig, you can add to that. So in the brick factory, initially, we had an idea. We really wanted people to go inside the brick factory. Some of it, you could clean it and just give it to different communities to use. Your point, the second point, is also very important. The way to avoid that is that there is a community taking ownership of that. And we've seen it, for instance, with a small intervention during the summer, where actually the students from the university kept on using it, maintaining it, because that became, their place to do things, to as you saw, to watch movies and to do other things. So that's, the way to the second part. Going to the first part of the question, in the brick factory, we wanted to reopen part of inside, but unfortunately the brick factory, because a couple of things, because of asbestos, the presence of asbestos, and because also some risk that is structural risk, I don't think we'll be able to do that. So we'll not be able to do it until when there's more significant investment in order to, stabilize from a structural point of view the brick factory and also remove asbestos from the site. So I think on the brick factory we are looking at extending what has been done over the last summer, making sure there's more space that people can use outside of the cover space. I think another important decision will come from the curator that you will meet later, from Catherine, about how this could become one of the centers of all the installations, and for some of the other interventions, we see that these kind of two almost high lines. The high line is a bridge, and then the green corridor, which is reusing the railway. Those per se should be quite easy to do. Also, going back to the previous question in terms of investment, it's really about reclaiming the space, about with scaffolding, making sure the connection is there. Going back to, as I said, the way to make sure this stays in the long term is to have somebody with skin on the game, the community or others, and then take responsibility. But something that usually also helps a lot is when you build the network. So if you just have an intervention node which is disconnected from everything else, it's much more difficult to maintain it than if you create a network. And what you've seen before on the map is really you got the brick factory, you got the bridge, you got existing public spaces, you got the promenade. When you combine all of that, it becomes a network. Also will be much easier to maintain it because people can seamlessly go from one node to another one.
One tiny comment on this. We learned very much in Palermo that if you want a more sustainable impact of certain projects, Manifesta is temporarily, that you need to include it in the plan of the Biennale itself. So what Mayor did 2 years ago, he invited us to give a vision on the, let's say, the regeneration of the city, specifically look at the brick factory. Mayor will say something about this. And he said, we want Manifesta also to think about a permanent institution, an interdisciplinary institution. And this afternoon, the creative mediator will sketch how we want to develop this institution. And of course, learning from Palermo, we included partners for the Post-Manifesta. Actually, it's a Dutch philanthropic organization who has already stated that they want to give money when Manifesta is gone for the Sifti Suleimani Library so that it can continue as a kind of a co-production, co-making space, which is very important, as you say, that after a Biennale something is not imploding. I think the mayor wants to say something about the brick factory because also there we have our thoughts about how it could continue.
Thank you, Hedwig. Not just about the brick factory, but in general, so that this does not remain an academic discussion and an academic exercise, the whole Manifesta, so it should not be just a discussion of urban planners, because obviously whoever has been in the public sector and had a position, I will tell you that there are 4 types of constraints that limit what you can do. First of all, it's a legal constraint in terms of what mayors and cities can do, which I think is probably the best of these constraints in the sense that in Kosovo we have legislation that gives quite a lot of authority and authorizations to the municipality. Second is what I call the administrative constraint, and that is that it took us about 9 years to start the purchase or to declare a public interest in the brick factory, and about 6 years to actually buy it. So you can imagine, so we started in about 2015 to buy it, 2015 beginning, and we officially transferred it at the end of last year. And this was not an issue of whether we had the money or not, it was just an issue that it took several National Assembly decisions, then several municipal assembly decisions, and then all of these bureaucrats actually doing the steps. One other example is we're building 4 schools with a public-private or PFI concept. We worked with a Colombian company, an Italian company on architecture. It took us 4.5 years. We started mid-2017 with the process, And it's all because of administrative procedures. Third is what I call the political constraint, which is you need the political parties, you need to navigate the system, you need municipal assembly, you need votes, and we're talking about these things. And the fourth, the most important, that this does not remain an academic discussion, is the budget or economic constraint. Just to give you a context, Pristina's budget is about 91 million euros. Let's compare it to, I don't know, Zagreb, which is a budget of 1 billion euros. And about 1 billion other euros in revenues of public companies, which means a total of about 2 billion euros. And Zagreb has about 700,000 people. We have about 350,000. Our budget is 91 million. Their budget is 1 billion. When you talk about, there is a, I think you mentioned it with ownership of the land. There is a huge discrepancy between the value of the property and the possibilities of the public sector to buy them. Just to give you an example, everybody here, I think, who's from Pristina knows Loja Majerve, where we tried to buy or expropriate a piece of land, and it's evaluated by the Ministry of Finance that have certified evaluators. It was valued at 165,000 euros for 100 square meters, Niori, for people who understand. So you can imagine if you want to build a park, you want to buy as a city of 2,000 square meters, you would have to give more than 3 million euros just for the land before you start doing anything. So this goes back also to the scale of the interventions. I mean, we can talk about, I don't know, doing something fancy, but we have to understand that we have huge constraints there. The whole concept is to actually do interventions that are possible. And this has to do a lot with the budget. This has to do a lot about the political constraint. We have to think about these all the time in order to make the change. And last, but not least, this feedback, this public discussion. My personal experience is that when we do discussions about plans, usually participation is from people who have land and want to increase their rights to build. Rarely do we have public discussions where people who do not have a narrow, specific, private interest, people outside of that group who come and talk about this. So, Manifesta, for me, it also should be promoting these types of discussion. Usually this has been going in parallel, which is one architectural, urban planning, academic discussion about how, things should look like, which to many people who work in the administration is unrealistic. And then you have this discussion, which is the real life, talking to individual people who want to increase their rights to build, who are thinking about their private things. The whole concept is to merge these two, that the public discussion becomes one that includes experts, citizens, talking about public spaces, and that is actually also realistic and it can be done. Just, this war, this battle, I didn't know the presentation before I came here, and I spoke about the battle for public space. One fact, a normal average Kosovo family spends more of their budget on cars than on education for their children. This is a fact, a statistic from the statistical agency. The urban planning is not just about nice drawings, it's about changing people's habits. We freed about, I would say, 30 or 40 streets, sidewalks for people to walk, and every time we had a huge battle with people fighting for their cars. The reaction that comes, the opposition that comes to that, like, where will I park my car, is something that you cannot imagine just by talking here. Because I've gone what I call through different levels of threats, from we're taking you to courts, to I'm going to the media, to physical threats for all kinds of things, because people love their cars here. And this is something that is not changed with drawings. It is changed by providing incentives, changing people's habits, that finally we can have this battle. So every sidewalk is a battle on its own, just to walk. Therefore, I say, anyone who becomes mayor, you do it in year 1 and 2, before you start thinking about votes for the next election. declare a war on cars, make it expensive in the center, close streets in the center that should not be used for cars. You know, make it difficult for cars and make it easier for pedestrians, bikes, and public transportation. This is the biggest battle that the mayor can fight because it's really the toughest one. I think all the others are jokes when you think about these types of things, and it's just actually changing people's habits.
Maybe in addition to what the mayor says, in the beginning of December we're planning an open discussion specifically about all the outcome of citizen assemblies, of all the studies we did, and about the proposal of Catherine, so that we can discuss this all in the open. And I agree with the mayor. We saw this in Palermo, where the mayor shut off from cars the inner city. And in the beginning it was a big riot and a big problem, and finally they accepted that that is the status. And I just came back from Tirana, where your colleague Irion also tried to close off these. So maybe it needs indeed action in this sense. Any other question?
This will unfortunately have to be the last one because we're running out of time.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. My question is to the Mayor of Pristina regarding the usage of rail tracks. Is there a long-term or short-term plan for the rail tracks to be reused by the train? For example, a connection to the northern part of Kosovo or Serbia, and because that could influence the use for the pedestrians on that specific plot of land. Thank you.
That is actually a central government type of authorization because it is a public company. There are two public companies in trains, one that runs the trains and the other that actually runs the whole network. It is used rarely in many places. Where we touched with that is actually that in the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, which was done by Mott MacDonald, one of the measures that they seem is financially viable is to do a light rail which would go from Brnitz to the airport using the existing tracks because they see huge benefits from that. It's a project that costs around 20 million euros, and they thought that it's financially viable because it could finance itself. It would include 4 stops in the city of Prishtina. It uses existing tracks because we also, you know, we were doing studies on trams and just to see whether it worked, and none of them were financially viable because of the huge cost that it would involve. We are buying our first 8 electric buses, I say, in December. Is a pilot with the 30 new buses, 8 are electric. We're going to test them in one of the lines. And the light rail is what I would say could be done in the next 10 years. And it would help significantly, especially with the traffic to Fushkosov, because that is becoming a huge, I would say almost a neighborhood of Pristina rather than a different municipality. And that also included in the central bus station, because that will be the main hub where buses from other cities would come, and that's where the public transportation in Pristina starts. And it would include a station that would link this light rail with the other part of the public transportation that we have. But otherwise, the track and about 3 meters on both sides is land owned by the public company. I know this because we had to pay like 2 million euros just for the Dragodan part where we, you know, removed some of the illegal houses, and we were trying to build that road that connects Arbri to the Retrotulim, the roundabout for Fushkosov. 2 million that we don't have.
Thank you very much, first of all, to all the speakers, especially to Carlo Ratti and his team. Fresh from the press is the urban vision, so it would be great if you could present it to the city of Pristina and to Mr. Mayor Ahmeti.
Sure, absolutely. Well, this is still, as I say, still work in progress, but I think, again, you know, we thought it was good to have a first draft. You see, it's quite heavy, and it's, you know, the presentation you saw today was actually extracted from this. It's a small part of what is contained here. So, again, as I said, don't take it as a final product. The final product will actually come later and will be part of what's being coordinated by Manifesta. But just as a first step, I wanted to share this kind of brick with the mayor.
Maybe you give us 6 other copies so that I send it to the candidates for mayor. Now.
Thank you all, and now you're all invited to grab a bite to eat, and we will start again at roughly 1:30 with the next big announcement. Thank you very much.